I am Ankita Robin and welcome to SG Global News. From the ceasefire in Gaza, which will hopefully usher in peace in the conflict-ridden region, to Bishop Robert Barron's surprising initiative on the 25th anniversary of Word on Fire, we have many stories to cover. The Catholic Ordinaries of the Holy Land, through a declaration on 16th January, welcomed the announcement of ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. These bishops' optimism for peace and relief shone through the declaration, wherein they expressed their eagerness to welcome back pilgrims to the Holy Land.
How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of the messenger who announces peace, who brings good news. The declaration of the Catholic Ordinaries on the ceasefire in Gaza begins with these words of Prophet Isaiah. After 15 months of relentless conflict, instability, carnage, poverty, hunger, and warmongering, peace has tentatively returned to Gaza through a ceasefire agreement brokered by the United States and Qatari governments. The Catholic Ordinaries of the Holy Land welcomed the announcement of the ceasefire, which aims to end the hostilities in Gaza, return the Israeli hostages, and release the Palestinian prisoners. They emphasized that this was a vital step toward halting destruction and addressing the urgent humanitarian needs of countless families affected by the conflict. The Catholic bishops of the Holy Land acknowledged that the conflict in Gaza arises from a long-standing struggle and deeply entrenched issues. They warned that failing to address these root causes would impede the peace process. The bishops urged all parties involved to recognize one another's suffering and work to build mutual trust. They also called on political leaders and the international community to develop a clear and just vision for the post-war period. In their statement, the bishops expressed their eagerness to welcome pilgrims back to the holy places in the Holy Land. Despite the immense suffering endured over the past months, their declaration radiated hope. They saw the ceasefire as a sign of God's faithfulness made manifest in the Jubilee year dedicated to hope that does not disappoint.
Temporarily putting an end to the unrest that has inflamed the Middle East, or perhaps the world, Israel and Hamas have called a truce by agreeing to a ceasefire deal on Wednesday. The deal, announced by outgoing US President Joe Biden, followed rounds of intense negotiations between both parties under the mediation of Qatari and American diplomats.
Israel and Hamas have agreed to a truce through a deal that will indefinitely pause the war in Gaza and secure the release of Israeli hostages who have been in captivity since the attacks on October 7th. The deal, facilitated by American and Qatari mediators, will temporarily end the 15-month conflict that has inflamed tensions in the Middle East. In a media briefing, US President Joe Biden officially announced that both parties had agreed to a ceasefire and praised the American diplomats involved in negotiating the landmark agreement. He also acknowledged the Israeli cabinet for approving the initial phase of the deal. Although the full details of the agreement have not yet been formally announced, it is known to include an initial 6-week ceasefire phase and the release of hostages held by Hamas. Qatar's Prime Minister, who was part of the mediation team, stated that the agreement would take effect as soon as it is approved by the Israeli cabinet. Israeli media reports that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar, and their allies are heading to Tel Aviv overnight to participate in a special parliamentary session. During the session, the ceasefire deal will be presented to the members of the Knesset, Israel's official legislature.
In one of his last significant foreign policy decisions, outgoing US President Joe Biden has decided to remove Cuba from the State Department's list of terrorism-sponsoring countries. Biden administration officials have praised the Vatican's role in normalizing relations between the US and Cuba, which have deteriorated since the communist takeover of the island nation in the 1960s.
As the Biden administration approaches its final days, the U.S. State Department has announced its decision to remove Cuba from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. A senior official from the department told the media that the decision to delist the Latin American country came after Biden's team concluded that there was no credible evidence that Cuba had been involved in supporting international terrorism in the past 6 months. The decision to include the small island nation in the then 4-nation list of terror-promoting countries was made during the waning days of the first Trump administration. Since 2021, the Biden administration has enlisted the Vatican's assistance in normalizing relations between the two countries, which have deteriorated since the communist takeover of the country in the 1960s. Even though Cuba was under communist rule, Catholics, comprising almost 60% of the total population, enjoyed relative freedom under Castro's administration. Pope St. John Paul II famously visited the island in 1998, met Fidel Castro in person, and prayed that the communist nation would become one of freedom, mutual trust, social justice, and lasting peace. The White House has coordinated with the Catholic Church, among others, to improve conditions in Cuba and secure the release of political prisoners arrested during the nationwide protests in 2023. Human Rights Watch reports that more than 1,000 individuals were freed in Cuba last year due to the Vatican's mediation efforts.
Thomas More Society, a law firm representing the interests of American Catholics, has submitted formal requests to Donald Trump for presidential pardons for 21 pro-life advocates, including a priest, who were unjustly convicted in various cases. Pro-life organizations are hopeful about securing the release of the jailed activists, as President-elect Donald Trump expressed his support for pro-life advocates during the campaign period.
The American Catholic law firm Thomas More Society submitted formal requests to Donald Trump for presidential pardons on behalf of 21 pro-life advocates who have been unjustly persecuted, convicted, and in several cases imprisoned by the Biden Department of Justice. In the letter dated January 14th, the attorneys urged that all 21 of them were richly deserving of full and unconditional pardons. They detailed how the Biden administration pursued the pro-life Americans, including a Holocaust survivor and a Catholic priest, and convicted them under the Federal FACE Act and Conspiracy Against Rights felony provisions. Steve Crampton, Thomas More Society senior counsel, said, quote, "Through full and unconditional pardons for these pro-life advocates, President Trump has the chance to remedy the harm done to them and their families, deliver on his campaign promises, and repair trust in our constitutional order," end quote. On June 22, 2024, while delivering a keynote address at the Faith and Freedom Coalition, President-elect Donald Trump expressed his support for the pro-life activists who have been aggressively prosecuted and jailed under the Biden administration. He specifically mentioned the case of a 76-year-old Catholic woman, Paulette Harlow, who was sentenced to 24 months in prison for violating the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act.
According to the annual report published by Open Doors International, 1 in 7 Christians across the world faces the threat of persecution. The World Watch List 2025, released on Wednesday, ranks North Korea first among the top 50 nations with the most offenses against Christians in 2025.
Open Doors International has published the World Watch List 2025, its annual ranking of the 50 countries where Christians face the most extreme persecution. North Korea remains at the top of the list with a violence score of 98 out of 100. Following North Korea in the top 10 are Somalia, Libya, Eritrea, Yemen, Nigeria, Pakistan, Sudan, Iran, and Afghanistan. The report highlights alarming statistics, noting that 4,476 Christians were killed last year due to their faith, while 4,744 were detained or imprisoned. The World Watch List 2025 also identified troubling trends. Many countries on the list have experienced an increase in anti-Christian violence. Christian communities have been particularly targeted in tightly controlled autocratic states and in countries destabilized by weak governance or civil wars. Sub-Saharan Africa has emerged as a particularly deadly region, with 8 of the 10 most dangerous countries for Christians located there. In some nations such as Afghanistan, Algeria, and China, churches have been forced to go underground due to severe government restrictions. According to Open Doors, 1 in 7 Christians worldwide faces persecution for their faith. The report underscores how different factors drive persecution in various regions. Civil wars in Myanmar, Yemen, and Sudan have created conditions that enable targeted attacks on Christians. In contrast, in countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, Islamic extremism is the primary factor driving violence and forcing Christians to flee their homes.
Word on Fire is celebrating its 25th anniversary with exciting plans for the future, including the establishment of a new order of priests to carry forward Bishop Robert Barron's mission of evangelization. The organization also announced expanded publishing efforts and a push into film production, solidifying its role as a leading Catholic media presence. From humble beginnings with Father Barron's radio homilies in 2000 to global recognition through projects like the Catholicism series, Word on Fire continues to grow and innovate in spreading faith.
As Word on Fire celebrates its 25th anniversary this year, Bishop Barron and his team have announced plans to establish a new order of priests to continue his work into the future and ensure the ongoing expansion of the Catholic media organization. Word on Fire has also announced its plans to expand its publishing efforts and evangelization through film production. According to the organization's website, initially 3 to 5 priests and novices will be recruited for the order to live according to the rule that Bishop Barron has already developed. Word on Fire has secured a home in Rochester, Minnesota, where the priests can begin living in a community and receive advanced formation to learn to evangelize within the Word on Fire ethos. Recruitment of the priests is expected to start shortly. Word on Fire had its humble beginnings when a young Father Robert Barron began recording his Sunday homilies to air on WGN radio in December 2000. In the following years, the Word on Fire website, YouTube channel, and weekly shows were launched. Their hit television series Catholicism, aired nationally in 2011, introduced Bishop Barron to thousands of viewers. In October 2024, Word on Fire launched a 13-year project to publish an English edition of Pope Benedict XVI's collected works.
That's all for today. Until we meet again, God bless and thank you.